The sharp blare of the car horn jolted Yvonne back to reality. She blinked and looked around, realizing they had arrived at the gates of the Antonovs' grand estate. Breathing a sigh of relief, she leaned back onto the seat. The journey had been long and tiring, but they had finally made it. As the wrought iron gate swung open, revealing the sprawling estate, Yvonne immediately reached for her phone. She opened the camera and inspected her face, her sharp eyes scanning for any flaws in her makeup. She frowned in irritation when she noticed that her lips looked dry, and the once vibrant red lipstick had started to fade. With a huff of annoyance, she quickly rummaged through her bag and retrieved her lipstick. Carefully, she reapplied it, her hand steady as she restored the bold red color to her lips. Once satisfied with her appearance, she gave herself one last approving glance before putting the phone back into her bag. "Ma'am, we have arrived," the driver said politely, glancing back at her from the front seat. Yvonne looked around at the estate's grand entrance, then nodded dismissively. She pulled out her phone again and dialed Briston's number. After a few rings, he picked up. "Hey, I'm here," Yvonne said, her voice clipped. "Really? Okay, come inside," Briston replied casually. "What do you mean, come inside?" Yvonne snapped, her irritation rising. "Huh?" Briston sounded confused at the other end of the line. "Are you expecting me to walk in there alone?" she demanded, her voice dripping with indignation. "What's wrong with that? Besides, it's not the first time you've been here," Briston replied, clearly baffled by her reaction. "You'd better come and accompany me inside or I'll leave," she shouted before abruptly hanging up. Her chest heaved with anger as she muttered to herself, "How dare he expect me to walk in alone? Absolutely not. He had better come or I'm leaving." She began fanning herself with her hands, trying to calm down. This was not how she had planned for the evening to go. She had deliberately taken her time getting ready, hoping to make a grand entrance and be the center of attention, unlike last time when Nara had outshone her. Yvonne wasn't going to let that happen again. Tonight was supposed to be her moment. Suddenly, her attention shifted to the driver, who was still seated in the car. "And you? What are you still doing sitting there? Do I have to beg you to open the door for me?" she barked, her voice sharp and commanding. The driver flinched at the harshness of her tone, his body tensing in fear. He hurriedly scrambled out of the car and rushed to her side, opening the door with a bow. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he muttered, his voice shaky. Yvonne stepped out of the car without sparing him a glance, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she waited for Briston to arrive. At that moment, Briston came out of the house and, upon seeing Yvonne, walked briskly towards her. Her face immediately tightened into a frown, signaling her displeasure. "I'm so sorry," he said as soon as he reached her. "Were you really expecting me to walk in alone? Coming here by myself is bad enough, and now this?" Yvonne snapped, her irritation evident. "I know, I'm really sorry about that." He apologized again, his tone sincere. Yvonne shot him a sharp glance, then looked away in frustration. But Briston, knowing her well, had a trick up his sleeve. "You know, you look beautiful this evening," he said, gently touching her cheek. A thin smile crept across Yvonne's lips despite herself. "I know, I always do," she replied proudly, her confidence returning. He chuckled heartily. "Now can we head inside? We're keeping everyone waiting," he said. The mention of everyone made Yvonne's eyes light up. She had planned to arrive last, ensuring she'd be the center of attention, just as she had wanted. "Okay," she said, slipping her arm through his as he led her toward the house. As they entered the living room where the family was gathered, Briston cheerfully announced, "Dad, Mom, guess who's here?" He guided Yvonne inside, her face glowing with anticipation. However, Jacob's reaction was far from welcoming. As soon as his eyes landed on Yvonne, his expression darkened into a frown, though he tried his best to conceal it. He scanned her appearance, taking in the bright red lipstick and the white gown that clung to her figure, a choice he found distasteful and far from appropriate. "Good evening, Dad. Good evening, Mum." Yvonne greeted her with a smile. Her eyes then locked on Penelope, who sat across the room. A memory of their last heated confrontation flashed through Yvonne's mind. Penelope had pulled her hair during that altercation. Penelope offered her a curt smile, the corners of her lips barely moving. It was a thin veil of politeness, hiding what Yvonne knew was lingering hostility. Jacob, sitting nearby, merely nodded his head in acknowledgement and took a sip from his champagne bottle, indifferent to Yvonne's arrival. The room, though filled with people, felt thick with unspoken tension. As she looked around, she realized that not everyone was pleased to see her. Peter looked around. He realized that Penelope and Jacob did not like Yvonne, and they did not even fail to hide it. It was so visible he looked at Yvonne. He was sure she was embarrassed. He decided to salvage the situation. "This must be the Yvonne you've been talking about all this while," Peter said with a welcoming grin as he approached them. Yvonne blinked in surprise, her eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. She didn't recognize him. As Peter continued walking toward them, Briston shot him a thankful glance, relieved by his warm demeanor. "She's as beautiful as you described. Come and give me a hug," Peter said, stretching his arms wide to embrace Yvonne. Caught off guard, Yvonne hesitated for a moment, unsure of whom this man was. Her brow furrowed in confusion as she slowly returned the hug, her movements stiff and awkward. "Thank you," she murmured, managing a small smile as she stepped back from him. Yvonne's eyes darted to Briston, and she leaned in slightly. "Who is he?" she asked in a low voice, her question tinged with suspicion. The abruptness of her inquiry startled Peter, who hadn't expected such a blunt question from her. He blinked, momentarily taken aback, before Briston quickly jumped in to smooth over the situation. "Yvonne, meet Peter, my father's best friend," Briston explained, his voice soft yet firm. "Oh, I didn't know. I'm so sorry," Yvonne said, her cheeks flushing slightly in embarrassment as she glanced at Peter. Peter smiled, though a hint of surprise still lingered in his eyes. "That's all right," he replied, before gesturing toward a woman sitting in the corner of the room. "That's Miriam over there, my wife." His voice softened, and Yvonne followed his gaze to a woman in a mint-colored gown. Miriam sat rigidly on the sofa, her pale face turned upward as if she were staring into nothingness. Her thin, bony frame looked fragile, almost ghostly, with her chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. Yvonne blinked at her, momentarily confused by the woman's stillness. "Why does she look like that? Is she mad?" Yvonne asked, her tone serious and without the tact that the situation required. Her bluntness caused a ripple of discomfort to spread through the room. Jacob, who had been seated quietly, bolted upright, his face a mask of shock. From the other side of the room, Penelope stifled a laugh, but quickly covered her mouth when Jacob shot her a sharp glare. Peter's face drained of color as Yvonne's words hung in the air, and Briston's heart sank in his chest. Peter was the most visibly shaken, realizing in that instant why Jacob had seemed so uneasy when Yvonne first arrived. The girl standing before him had no sense of decorum. She was, without a doubt, the most ill-mannered person he had ever encountered. Briston shot Yvonne a warning glance and whispered through clenched teeth, "Can you please shut your mouth?" She responded with a fierce glare, her eyes flashing in annoyance. Peter, shaking his head, returned to his seat, his face etched with disapproval. "Let's go and sit down," Briston said, his voice firm but quiet as he took Yvonne by the hand and led her to an empty sofa. As they sat, Yvonne leaned close to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is no one saying anything?" she asked, her confusion obvious. "Sit down and shut the hell up," Briston whispered back, his patience wearing thin. The uncomfortable silence in the room was interrupted when Peter checked his watch and looked around. "Gordon seems to be taking a lot of time, don't you think so?" he asked, his voice a deliberate attempt to cut through the tension. At that moment, the sound of heels clacking against the floor echoed from the hallway, growing louder with each step. Everyone's attention shifted toward the doorway as the person neared. Jacob stood up with a bright smile spreading across his face as Gordon and Nara entered the room. "Look who we have here, my very own son and my favorite daughter-in-law," Jacob exclaimed, his voice brimming with excitement as he hurried over to greet them. His happiness was palpable, radiating through the room as he extended his arms toward Nara. Come and give your father-in-law a hug," Jacob said warmly, his face glowing as Nara stepped forward and embraced him. "How have you been, Dad?" Nara asked softly, returning the hug with a smile. "Don't I deserve a hug too, Dad?" Gordon joked from behind her, his voice playful. Jacob, his face beaming with joy, burst into laughter before pulling Gordon into a hug as well. Of course, come here, son," Jacob said as he patted Gordon's back. As they stepped apart, Jacob grinned broadly. "Guess who else is here?" he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement. I, Gordon began, but Jacob cut him off, unable to contain his enthusiasm. Gordon's face lit up with excitement when he turned and saw Peter standing across the room. "Uncle Peter, is that really you?" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with joy. It had been years since they'd last seen each other, and the surprise reunion filled him with warmth. Without hesitation, he walked quickly toward Peter and embraced him. "Gordon, look at you. You've grown so big. I almost didn't recognize you," Peter said, pulling back to get a good look at him. Gordon grinned. "When did you get back to the country? You didn't even tell me you were here." Peter chuckled and glanced toward Jacob. "Well, your dad wanted to keep it as a surprise." Gordon turned to his father, Jacob, who was beaming with satisfaction. "Well, it sure was a surprise," Gordon said, shaking his head with an amused smile. As Peter nodded in response, his eyes landed on Nara, who stood gracefully beside Jacob. She radiated a quiet elegance that immediately caught Peter's attention. He couldn't help but admire her, noting how the white gown she wore seemed to exude an aura of calmness. "This must be the wife," Peter said as he walked over to where Nara stood next to Jacob. Jacob grinned proudly, his eyes twinkling with pride. "Yes, this is Nara, my daughter-in-law. She's beautiful, isn't she?" Nara extended her hand politely, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Good evening," she said in a gentle voice as Peter shook her hand. Peter smiled warmly in return. "So, you're the one who swept Gordon off his feet?" Nara blushed at the compliment, her cheeks flushing a delicate pink as she cast her eyes downward in modesty. At the same time, she felt an uneasy sensation wash over her. From across the room, she sensed someone's intense gaze on her. Nara looked up and caught sight of Yvonne staring at her, her expression filled with unmistakable anger. The moment Nara had entered the room, Yvonne's face had twisted into a scowl. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Nara had also worn a white dress, but hers seemed to glow with a regal quality that only heightened her frustration. The shimmering diamond necklace around Nara's neck caught the light, and Yvonne was certain it was worth 10 times more than the one she wore. A memory of the harsh words Nara had spoken to her in the past flashed through Yvonne's mind, and her fury only deepened. Despite her seething anger, Yvonne forced herself to remain composed. She needed to keep her emotions in check, even if the sight of Nara made her blood boil. Finally, after a tense silence, Yvonne spoke up, her voice tight and controlled. "Hey, Nara," she said, her tone laced with forced civility. Her words hung in the air, carrying with them an undercurrent of resentment that everyone in the room could sense. Nara turned and smiled at Yvonne. "Won't you get up and hug me?" she asked, her smile widening as she spoke. Yvonne glared at her, anger simmering beneath the surface. Who did Nara think she was to demand a hug from her? She clenched her fists, feeling the tension rise, but when she noticed everyone's eyes on her, she reluctantly stood and embraced her. "Don't think you've won with this little stunt," she hissed into Nada's ear as they hugged. Across the room, Peter broke the silence. "Gordon, do you remember your Aunt Miriam?" he asked, pointing to a woman who had remained silent throughout the interaction. Gordon's gaze followed Peter's gesture. He had already noticed her when he entered but hadn't recognized her. She looked so different from the way he remembered her. He had been just a boy the last time he saw her, but he hadn't forgotten her entirely. Still, the years had not been kind. "That's Aunt Miriam?" Gordon's voice was filled with pity. Miriam sat quietly, her frail frame a stark contrast to the woman he remembered. Nara, watching from the side, felt a pang of sympathy for her. She couldn't help but wonder what had happened to bring her to this state. Ignoring Penelope, Gordon walked over to where Miriam sat and knelt beside her, taking her hands gently in his. "Aunt Miriam," he said softly. At the sound of his voice, Miriam turned her head, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Gordon?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is that you, Gordon?" "Yes, Aunt Miriam, it's me," Gordon replied, smiling warmly. Miriam straightened up slightly, reaching out to touch his face. "It's really you. You've grown so big," she said, her hands trembling as they cupped his face. Gordon's smile widened as he held her hands. "And you've grown so big, too," he said, his voice filled with tenderness. Miriam's expression softened. Gordon, where's Simon? You didn't call him to play with you, she said, her voice suddenly wistful. Gordon's smile disappeared immediately. He turned to Peter, who gave him a solemn nod. This is how she's been ever since, Peter said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. Gordon rose to his feet, shaking his head. This wasn't what he had expected at all. He felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. Why the sad faces? Come on, brighten up, everyone. Dinner is ready. Let's head to the dining table, he said, his voice cheerful, trying to lighten the mood of the environment. He led the way to the dining room, and the others followed, their footsteps heavy. The dining table was grand, covered in a lavish spread of continental dishes. Stewards in crisp, neatly pressed uniforms stood at attention by each pillar, awaiting orders. Jacob surveyed the room and smiled with satisfaction. Everything was exactly as he had planned. He took his place at the head of the table, and the others settled into their assigned seats. When everyone was seated, he smiled and turned to face Nara. So, tell me, Nara, he began, casting a glance at Gordon before continuing. How have you been? I saw the news about you getting signed to Dynasty. Peter's head snapped up, clearly surprised. She's a model? Yes, of course, Jacob replied, beaming. Doesn't she look like one? Peter nodded, his eyes wide. I thought as much when I first saw her. Nara smiled modestly. Well, Dad, it's been exciting. I'm still getting to know the girls at the agency, but so far it's been fun. Jacob nodded approvingly. I'm sure your sister gave you a tour of the whole place. Nara glanced over at Yvonne and smiled. Yvonne met her gaze briefly before quickly looking away. Yvonne did an excellent job, she said, her voice warm. Yvonne blinked, surprised. What was Nara playing at? Why was she suddenly being so kind? There had to be a catch. Peter, still processing the information, looked confused. Hold on. Wait a minute. Yvonne here is your sister? He asked, astonished. Jacob chuckled lightly. Yes, of course, I suppose I forgot to mention that. They're actually sisters. Can you imagine? Yvonne's voice cut through the room like ice. She's not my sister. She's my father's illegitimate daughter, she said sharply. A stunned silence fell over the table. Briston shot Yvonne a sharp look. He hadn't expected this from her, not after the earlier incident in the living room. He silently wished she would learn to control her tongue. Peter was taken aback, his eyes wide with shock. He couldn't believe the words that had just come out of Yvonne's mouth, though part of him wasn't surprised, given how she had spoken to his wife earlier. Gordon, sensing the tension rising, gently squeezed Nada's hand, silently urging her to stay calm. Jacob's expression darkened as he cast an irritated glare at Yvonne. She, however, remained emotionless, her face a blank mask. She had grown accustomed to the disapproving stares and didn't care anymore. Actually, they're stepsisters, Jacob said, trying to ease the tension in the air. Ah, that makes sense, Peter replied, finally understanding. No wonder they're so different. Yvonne's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing at him. Who did he think he was, comparing her to Nara? She felt the need to put him in his place. What do you mean by different? She asked, her voice sharp. Peter blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected his comment to provoke such a reaction. Drop it, Briston whispered urgently, trying to rein Yvonne in, but she wasn't having it. Tell me, what do you mean by different? She repeated, her tone more demanding now. Before Peter could respond, Jacob intervened. Well, isn't it obvious? He said with a smirk. Yvonne clenched her fists, anger coursing through her. The only thing stopping her from ripping into Jacob was the immense power and influence he wielded. She bit her tongue and faced forward, choosing silence over confrontation. For now. Maybe when you start behaving properly, you'll understand, Jacob added smugly. And the next time you open your mouth and talk to my guests in such a manner. His voice trailed off as Penelope gently placed her hand on his arm, signaling him to stop. Peter, watching the scene unfold, was shocked. This was far from what he had anticipated. Yvonne, with her beauty and poise, seemed so composed, but her words revealed a sharp edge he hadn't expected. He found himself wondering what kind of person she really was. Now he knew why Jacob and Penelope were against Briston marrying her. Gordon, meanwhile, stayed quiet, holding Nada's hand firmly. He had no interest in engaging in the escalating tensions. His silence was his way of staying above the fray. Penelope signaled one of the stewards to open a bottle of wine. The steward moved quickly, expertly opening the bottle and pouring it into their glasses before retreating to his post. Jacob took a deep breath, his smile returning. "Let's raise a toast," he said, lifting his glass. "To family, friendship, and good health." Everyone followed suit, raising their glasses. Peter helped Miriam lift hers, and as Jacob finished his toast, the glasses clinked together in a shared moment of civility. They all took a sip of the wine, the tension in the air momentarily dissipating. "This wine tastes great, Dad," Gordon said as he savored the taste of the wine. "This is 100-year-old wine. I ordered it straight from Italy," he said boastfully. "Wow," Gordon said, smiling. Just as the calm began to settle, Miriam gently nudged Peter. "I need to use the restroom," she whispered. Peter smiled softly. "Excuse me, I need to take her to the restroom," he said, standing up. "That won't be necessary, I'll take her," Penelope offered quickly, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Peter paused, sensing something behind her offer. He knew Penelope well enough to be wary. "Oh no, it's fine, I can do it," he replied, keeping his tone polite but firm. But Penelope wasn't one to back down easily. "I said I'd do it," she insisted, rising from her seat and walking over to their side of the table. Peter glanced around the room. All eyes were on him now, watching the exchange closely. He knew he couldn't refuse much longer without arousing suspicion. Reluctantly, he nodded, allowing her to take over, though a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Just let her escort her," Jacob chimed in, smiling slightly. "After all, they're both women. Don't you think it's better that way?" Peter hesitated, but under the pressure he muttered, "Okay." Penelope's smile turned mischievous as she took Miriam's hand, helping her to her feet. "You can all start eating, we'll join you shortly," she said, leading Miriam out of the dining room. Peter watched them go, his heart pounding. He had a terrible feeling about this. He knew Penelope was up to no good. As they ascended the staircase and were safely out of sight, Penelope's demeanor shifted. She released Miriam's hand and gripped her arm tightly, shoving her roughly as they continued climbing. "This is what you get for marrying that scumbag you call a husband," Penelope hissed. "Ouch!" Miriam cried out in pain. Penelope sneered. "Oh, so you can feel? I thought you were a lifeless, ugly thing," she spat, opening the door to one of the guest bathrooms. With another rough shove, she pushed Miriam inside and slammed the door shut. Miriam lay trembling on the bathroom floor. Fear was in her broad eyes. Penelope stood over her, eyes cold and calculating, savoring the moment. She had been waiting for this confrontation, praying for the chance to finally make Miriam pay for everything Peter had made her pass through. When Peter mentioned that Miriam needed to use the bathroom, she had seized the opportunity, volunteering quickly. Now, she would teach Miriam a lesson she wouldn't forget in a hurry. Bending down, she glared at Miriam, who instinctively turned her face away. "Look at me!" Penelope demanded, her voice cold and sharp. Miriam remained silent, her head still turned, her body stiff with fear. "I said, look at me!" Penelope shouted, her patience wearing thin. When Miriam still refused to respond, Penelope's anger erupted. She grabbed Miriam's hair and yanked her up violently, forcing her to face her. "When I tell you to look at me, you do it!" Penelope hissed through gritted teeth. Miriam still didn't speak, her only reaction being a weak attempt to loosen Penelope's grip on her hair, her hands trembling as she held on to her. Penelope sneered. "Do you even know what your husband has been up to?" "Of course you don't. He's—" Before she could finish, the door suddenly swung open. Penelope turned sharply to see Nara standing in the doorway. Nara's eyes widened in shock, but she stood her ground. "What the hell are you doing here?" Penelope snapped, her face a mask of irritation. Nara, still reeling from the sight in front of her, stayed silent for a moment, her mind racing to process what she had just walked in on. "Are you deaf?" Penelope demanded again, her voice rising in anger. She finally found her voice. "What are you doing? Why are you grabbing her by the hair? Can't you see she's sick?" she said, her voice firm as she pushed Penelope's hands away from Miriam. Penelope blinked, momentarily stunned by her audacity. "What do you think you're doing?" she spat, her anger flaring again. Nara, now kneeling beside Miriam and gently holding her hands, looked up at Penelope with disgust. "Are you really this heartless? What has this sick woman ever done to you?" she asked, her voice thick with disbelief and contempt. For a moment, Penelope was taken aback, but then she burst into mocking laughter. "Heartless?" she sneered. "You have no idea what you're meddling in, little girl, but I'll give you the benefit of the doubt today." Her tone grew icier. "Don't you ever interfere in my business again, you illegitimate thing." With that, Penelope stormed out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind her, leaving her and Miriam alone in the bathroom. She sat there in silence for a moment, her heart pounding. She had heard rumors about Penelope's cruelty, but seeing it firsthand was a different experience entirely. It was one thing to hear stories, but witnessing her ruthlessness with her own eyes made her realize just how dangerous Penelope could be. Gently, she helped Miriam sit up. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Miriam nodded weakly, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." Nara shook her head, still stunned. She'd come to understand Penelope's viciousness in a way she hadn't expected, and her mind was now racing with thoughts of what to do next. She couldn't let this go unanswered, but for now, her priority was making sure Miriam was safe. "Are you okay?" Nara asked Miriam once more as she helped her to her feet. Miriam looked at her without uttering a word, her face blank, and walked straight into the bathroom. A few seconds later she emerged, still silent, and looked at Nara again. "Are you done using the bathroom?" Nara asked, confused by her behavior. Miriam nodded in response. "Okay then. Let me take you back to the dining room," Nara said softly, gently taking her hands as they left the bathroom together. Meanwhile, Penelope approached the dining room without Miriam, causing Peter to grow increasingly apprehensive. His earlier suspicions were gnawing at him. He had a bad feeling ever since Penelope had volunteered to take Miriam to the bathroom. "Where is Miriam?" he asked, his voice tight as Penelope settled into her seat. Penelope, already furious after Nara had walked in on her earlier, eyed Peter coldly before picking up her cutlery. She was fuming inside but remained eerily quiet. "Mum, Uncle Peter just asked you a question?" Briston said, noticing the tension and his mother's unusual silence. "She's with Nara. They'll be here soon," Penelope finally responded, her voice curt and dismissive. Almost immediately, Nara walked into the room holding Miriam's hand. Peter's eyes darted toward Miriam, instantly noticing something was off. "What took you so long? And what happened to her hair?" he asked, his tone laced with concern. Miriam's hair was clearly not in the same neat condition as when she had left earlier. "Nara, dear, what happened to her hair?" Peter asked again, his curiosity growing. Nara hesitated for a moment, glancing toward Penelope, who remained focused on her meal, showing no sign of concern or guilt. Her indifference was chilling. Nara couldn't help but wonder how someone could be so cold-hearted. She had seen Penelope mistreat Miriam just moments ago, and yet here she was, completely unbothered. Her mind raced. What had Miriam done to deserve such cruelty from her? "A bug fell on her hair," Nara lied, knowing that now wasn't the time to reveal what she had witnessed. "I helped her get it out." "Really? Miriam hates bugs." "Thank God you got it out," Peter said, relieved, a smile spreading across his face. Nara forced a smile and quietly returned to her seat. Gordon, sitting nearby, had been watching her closely since she entered the room with Miriam. He could tell something was off. There was a look in her eyes, like she had seen something disturbing. Given how Penelope had walked in earlier, he was certain whatever had happened in the bathroom had something to do with her. "What happened in there?" "You look shaken," Gordon asked, his voice low but full of concern. Nara didn't answer immediately, her thoughts racing. She glanced briefly at Penelope, who still appeared unmoved and cold, completely detached from the rest of the room. Nara felt a chill run down her spine. Whatever had happened, it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. "Are you okay?" Gordon asked again, his voice now barely a whisper, as he leaned in closer to her. "Oh yeah, I am. Just a little bit hungry," Nara replied quickly, snapping herself out of her daze. "Oh, okay then. Dig in, the food is really nice," Gordon said, nodding toward her plate. Nara smiled and picked up her cutlery, beginning to eat. The food was really delicious, and for a brief moment, It distracted her from the tense situation with Penelope. Suddenly, Jacob broke the silence. "Gordon, why don't you tell your Uncle Peter how you managed to get married so quickly like it happened in the blink of an eye?" he said with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. "Is that really necessary?" Penelope snapped, her sharp tone cutting through the air. "Of course it is," Peter chimed in, eager to join the conversation. "I'd really love to know how my godson got married without anyone reaching out to us." Penelope glared at Peter, her expression full of anger, but she held back from saying anything further, likely to avoid upsetting Jacob. "Go on, tell your uncle the whole story," Jacob urged, downing the last of his wine. Gordon sighed. "There's not much to it, really. We met overseas, fell in love, and got married." "Overseas, you say?" Peter asked, intrigued. "Yes, Uncle," Gordon replied. "I can't believe the two of you managed to keep this hidden from me for 5 years," Jacob said, smiling as though the idea amused him. "Dad, we were going to tell you, but—" Gordon began, only to be interrupted. "But you never did," Jacob finished, though he didn't seem angry. "Well, that's all right." Jacob then turned his attention to Nara. "Nara, why don't you ever drop by to visit?" "Huh?" Nara asked, surprised by the sudden shift in focus. She stammered, caught off guard and unsure of how to respond. "You know what?" Jacob continued. "One of these days you should come around and I'll take you to our golf club." "Golf club?" Nara repeated, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. "Yeah, you play golf, right?" Jacob asked, clearly excited about the idea. "Oh, yes, of course," she lied, forcing a smile. In reality, the closest she had ever come to a golf ball was seeing one in a store. She had never played and wasn't particularly interested in the sport. But looking at Jacob's eager expression, she couldn't bring herself to say no. She didn't want to hurt his feelings. "That's good to hear," Jacob said, his smile widening. The room fell into a comfortable silence for a moment before Peter suddenly turned to Gordon, changing the subject entirely. "Now that you're married, you know you need to start preparing yourself to run the company." Gordon froze, the weight of his uncle's words settling heavily on him. Running the company had always been an expectation, but now that it was being brought up so directly, the reality of it hit him harder than ever. "Yes, Uncle," Gordon said slowly, but his mind was elsewhere. He glanced at Nara, wondering what she was thinking. The evening was taking unexpected turns, and it felt like everyone had something on their mind that they weren't saying. Penelope dropped the cutlery in her hands and looked at him, her anger palpable. Sharing a dining table with Peter was bad enough, but to bring up the company issue at dinner? It was infuriating. "Yes, of course," Gordon said, smiling, completely unfazed by the tension in the room. Briston sat silently, observing the dinner unfold, though he could feel his frustration growing. Since they had all sat down, only 2 names had been mentioned, Gordon and Nara. Not a single word about him or Yvonne. It felt like they were invisible, sitting on the periphery of the conversation, as if their presence didn't matter. The moment Peter brought up the company matter, Briston couldn't contain his anger any longer. He raised his wine glass and clicked it with his fork. The sound pierced through the ongoing chatter, catching everyone's attention. "I have an announcement," he said, smiling but trying to mask his frustration. Yvonne, who had been equally quiet throughout the meal, turned to face him, puzzled. She wondered what kind of announcement Briston could possibly have. Then a sudden thought crossed her mind. Was he going to reveal the surprise he had been planning for her? Her heart skipped a beat. But if it was truly meant to be a surprise, why was he announcing it in front of the whole family? "What kind of announcement?" she asked, her voice cautious. Briston cleared his throat and stood up. "Well, Yvonne and I are getting married by the end of next month." "What?" Yvonne gasped in disbelief. "What?" Jacob, Yvonne's father, exclaimed, looking equally shocked. Yvonne couldn't believe her ears. Marriage? To Briston? That was the furthest thing from her mind. She was angry, no, furious, that Briston hadn't even had the decency to discuss this with her first. How could he announce something so significant without her consent? "What do you mean next month?" she demanded. "When did we ever talk about this?" "Surprise!" Briston exclaimed, still smiling, though the confidence in his voice was beginning to waver. "You must be kidding me," Yvonne spat, her voice dripping with venom. How the hell could you do something like that without telling me first? What's the problem? Briston asked, the smile now fading from his face. He had genuinely thought this would make her happy. Don't you like my surprise? Yvonne glared at him, her anger bubbling to the surface. I can't believe this. Before he could say another word, Yvonne stood up and delivered a sharp slap across his face, the sound reverberating through the room. The next time you pull a stunt like this without consulting me first, you'll see a side of me you won't like, she hissed. Without another glance, she stormed out of the dining room. Yvonne! Briston shouted after her, but she was already gone. The room fell into an awkward silence as all eyes turned to Briston, who stood there humiliated. He stared at everyone in the room, suddenly feeling exposed and foolish. Jacob broke the silence, his voice cold and cutting. Now you see why I've been telling you not to bring that girl into my home. This is exactly what I've been warning you about. Don't tell me that, Dad, Briston snapped. You've never liked her. Don't act like this is new. You've hated her from the start. Are you blind, Briston? Jacob shot back, his patience thin. The girl isn't even ready to get married. You think you can force her into this? Dad, she is ready, Briston insisted, though his voice was shaky now, his earlier confidence all but gone. She was just overwhelmed, that's all. Gordon, who had been quietly watching the exchange, burst into laughter, unable to contain himself. Briston turned sharply toward him, his face flushed with anger. What's so funny, huh? What gives you the right to laugh at me? Look, Briston, Gordon said, his tone dismissive. I don't have time for this. You're making a fool of yourself. Briston's face reddened even more. Father's golden boy, he sneered, his voice dripping with bitterness. You laugh because everything comes easy for you, don't you? You have no right to mock me. Yvonne and I will get married, and that's final. Gordon raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. How? After what just happened? She slapped you in front of everyone. Do you really think she's going to marry you? That's my problem, and I'll deal with it, Briston retorted. I didn't come here for your approval. I just came to announce my wedding date. I'm out of here. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. Penelope watched him go, shaking her head bitterly. She had always wondered how she had raised such a weakling. He couldn't even stand up for himself properly. Though she didn't say it aloud, part of her was glad that the engagement seemed to be falling apart. At least Briston wouldn't have to marry that insufferable Yvonne. Her mind drifted to her long-standing feud with Yvonne's mother, a woman she despised more than anyone. Penelope's anger flared up every time she thought of her. The idea of Yvonne becoming part of the family only made her hatred burn hotter. Peter could only look. He didn't say a word. He had been, in fact, surprised. He had thought he had actually seen the worst from Yvonne after she had rudely addressed his wife. But seeing her slap Briston was a discovery. He gulped twice and drank from his wineglass. You see what that son of yours has caused? Penelope looked at him and hated when Jacob addressed Briston as only her son. What do you mean by my son? Isn't he your son too? Jacob coughed, clearing his throat. All I am saying is that you should speak to your son and let him reconsider whatever plans he had made with that girl, Jacob said finally. Penelope sighed. She was already getting tired of the dinner. She stood up angrily and faced Peter. I will leave you guys alone. I am done eating. And with that she walked out of the room, leaving them to themselves. Everywhere was quiet immediately after Penelope stormed out. Jacob sighed and shook his head, still unable to comprehend how the dinner he had carefully planned had spiraled out of control. Nara felt an overwhelming sense of awkwardness. She had always thought her family had the most problems, but after what she had just witnessed, she was having second thoughts. She shifted uncomfortably, not knowing where to direct her gaze. Embarrassment washed over her, and she tapped Gordon's palm gently, hoping he would understand her need to leave. Dad, I think it's time for us to go, Gordon said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Nara exhaled softly, relieved that Gordon seemed to have read her mind. Me too. I think we should leave as well, Peter added, glancing at Jacob with a weak smile. Jacob, sensing the tension, gave both Gordon and Peter a reassuring smile. He understood that none of this was their fault. Things had just unfolded the way they did. It's all right, he said, standing up from his seat. Nara rose to her feet as soon as Gordon stood. Thank you for having us, Dad. she said quietly, offering Jacob a small, respectful smile. Jacob forced a smile in return, his frustration barely concealed. "Don't forget about the golf club date. Call me once your schedule clears," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Okay, Dad," Gordon responded, walking over to his father and giving him a brief hug. "See you later, Dad." He then turned to Miriam, who had been silently observing the chaos from her seat. "Bye, Aunt Miriam," Gordon said as he bent down to peck her on the cheek. Just as Gordon and Nara were about to leave, Jacob added, "Oh, Gordon, come by the office tomorrow. We need to have an important discussion." Gordon furrowed his brows slightly. "Is there something wrong?" "No, nothing's wrong," Jacob replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Just something important we need to talk about." "All right, Dad. I'll see you tomorrow," Gordon agreed, still a little confused. Nara, eager to leave, followed Gordon. "Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Uncle Peter. Bye, Aunt Miriam," she said, her voice cheerful despite the tension in the room. With a final smile, she and Gordon left the dining room. Peter let out a sigh of relief as soon as the door closed behind them. "Phew! What a night," he said, walking over to where Miriam sat. He extended his hand to help her up, shaking his head as though to shake off the evening's discomfort. Jacob, however, didn't share Peter's relief. His face remained sullen, his jaw tight with anger. Peter noticed and tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, my friend," he said. "Surely you're not that upset about what happened." Jacob looked at him, anger flashing in his eyes before he forced another smile. "It's all right. Drive safely," he said, his voice tight with barely restrained emotion. Peter nodded and, with Miriam in tow, made his way out, leaving Jacob alone in the silence of the large house and the table of half-eaten dinner. Once he was sure everyone had left, he inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm brewing inside him. His face darkened as he made his way upstairs, his footsteps heavy with frustration. He pushed open the door to his room and it swung open with a bang. Penelope was already seated on the bed, legs crossed, looking as though she had been waiting for him. Her expression was calm, almost too calm, given the disastrous dinner that had just taken place. "What was the meaning of that stunt you pulled out there?" Jacob snapped as soon as he entered the room. Penelope raised an eyebrow, her face showing mild amusement. "What stunt?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what I'm talking about," Jacob said, his voice laced with anger as he shoved his hands deep into his pockets, pacing the room. Penelope, however, didn't seem fazed by his anger. Instead, she burst into a hearty laugh, the sound catching Jacob off guard. He stopped pacing, staring at her in disbelief. There was nothing remotely funny about the situation, yet here she was, laughing as though he had just told the best joke in the world. "And what the hell is so funny?" he demanded, his patience wearing thin. She finally stopped laughing and stood up, her eyes locking with his in a way that made his pulse quicken with both anger and unease. "You think what I did out there was a stunt?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "Then you really don't know me at all." Jacob was taken aback by her words. He stared at her, unsure of how to respond. There was something different about her, something unsettling that he couldn't quite put his finger on. "And if you think tonight was bad, just wait. This is only the beginning," she said, her voice clear and firm as she walked closer to him. Jacob clenched his fists, his anger bubbling beneath the surface, but for the first time that night he found himself speechless. "Are you seriously talking to me like that?" Jacob snapped, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Oh yes, I'm talking to you. Who else is standing in front of me?" Penelope retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What the hell has come over you? Do you realize you embarrassed me in front of my guests? Do you?" Jacob's anger flared, his patience already worn thin. "Oh, please, spare me that. And for the record, I don't care," Penelope shot back. "Huh?" Jacob's face twisted in confusion. "You heard me. I don't care. Since you made this dinner all about your precious son Gordon and that illegitimate girl who calls herself Nara—" "What do you mean by that?" Jacob interrupted, completely baffled by her outburst. "Gordon this, Gordon that, Nara this, Nara that. That's all I've heard since the dinner started. Did it ever occur to you how Briston felt? You made him sit there like a fool, completely disregarded?" She snapped, her breath coming in shallow gasps from the intensity of her anger. Jacob burst into laughter. Oh, Briston was the reason you behaved the way you did, right? And let me guess, you had something to do with that ridiculous announcement he made tonight? And if I did, what would you do about it, huh? She stepped closer, her eyes flashing with defiance. Jacob smiled coldly. You'd better knock some sense into that boy of yours or I'll do it for you. Her eyes narrowed. You know what, Jacob? As much as I don't support him marrying that girl, I don't like the way you speak to Briston. Can't you see the boy is only trying to please you? Please me? Jacob scoffed. Well, with what he pulled tonight, I am far from pleased. Penelope stepped closer, her voice rising. You've never treated him fairly. He'll never be like Gordon in your eyes, will he? And that's why you've already decided to hand the company over to Gordon when you know Briston's been working tirelessly with you. Huh? Where the hell was he? Jacob shrugged dismissively. So? What's wrong with that? Everything is wrong with that, Jacob. You make decisions without even considering how they affect anyone else. You're blind to how much Briston has sacrificed for this family? Her voice was thick with bitterness. Jacob sighed and shook his head. Do I need to remind you that Gordon left this house because of you and your son? If I were being as unfair as you claim, do you think I would have let him go? Both Gordon and Briston are my sons and I love them equally. But as for the company, there's nothing to discuss. Gordon is my firstborn and the company belongs to him. That's final. Penelope stared at him, her face contorted with a mix of anger and pain. This is because of her, isn't it? Who? Jacob's eyes flickered with uncertainty. You know exactly who I'm talking about. Even after all these years of marriage, you still haven't forgotten about her. Gordon reminds you of her, doesn't he? That's why you're doing this. You're still stuck in the past. Penelope's voice trembled, her anger masking deeper emotions. Jacob looked away, avoiding her piercing gaze. I don't know what you're talking about, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Oh, don't play dumb. I know the truth, Jacob. No matter what I do, I'll never be her. And no matter how hard Briston tries, he'll never be enough for you because he isn't her son. That's the real reason you favor Gordon. Jacob remained silent, his body tense. He couldn't meet her eyes, couldn't admit the truth, even to himself. Penelope's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of unresolved pain. Penelope turned away, her heart heavy. You may not admit it, Jacob, but deep down we both know why you've made your choice. I don't know what you're talking about, Jacob said, turning away, his voice cold. You know exactly what I'm talking about. It's because of Grace, right? Gordon's mother, Penelope pressed. Come on, Jacob, that stupid woman has been dead for years. At that moment, Jacob's entire demeanor shifted. He spun around, eyes blazing with fury, and before Penelope could react, he grabbed her by the neck and shoved her roughly against the wall. Let this be the last time you mention her name with that filthy mouth of yours, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Penelope gasped, her hands flying to his, desperately trying to loosen his grip. Her face reddened as she struggled for air, her eyes wide with panic. You're not even close to being worthy of mentioning her name, Jacob continued, his voice seething with rage. In fact, I forbid you to ever say her name again. Do you understand? Penelope's choking became more frantic as she tried in vain to pry his hands away. Finally, Jacob released her, shoving her aside roughly. She crumpled to the ground, coughing and clutching her neck, tears streaming down her face. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she struggled to compose herself. Get your son in line, Jacob spat, glaring down at her, or I will handle it my way. With that, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Penelope remained on the floor, trembling with both fear and anger. She folded her arms across her chest, her mind racing. This was the first time Jacob had ever laid hands on her, but she wasn't surprised. She knew she'd struck a nerve by mentioning Grace, and yet she wasn't sorry. Ah! She screamed in frustration, her voice echoing through the empty room. I swear I'd rather die than watch you hand over that company to Gordon, even if it's the last thing I do, she muttered, seething with hatred as she breathed heavily, trying to calm herself. Meanwhile, Briston had left the dining room in a fit of anger and confusion. He got into his car, determined to catch up with Yvonne. His mind raced as he drove, replaying the slap she had given him in front of everyone. He didn't understand what he had done wrong. After all, he had only set a date for their wedding. Her reaction had been completely uncalled for, and he needed answers. He soon spotted her car ahead of him. There was a sharp bend in the road, and he knew if he wanted to talk to her, he needed to overtake and block her path. With a quick maneuver, he swerved in front of her car and brought his own to a halt. Yvonne, recognizing Briston's car, stepped out, her face filled with anger. Briston quickly exited his own vehicle, sighing as he approached her. "What are you trying to do? Cause an accident?" Yvonne snapped. "What was the meaning of that stunt you pulled in front of my family?" Briston shot back. Yvonne sighed loudly, crossing her arms. "I don't see anything wrong with what I did." "Hey, you slapped me in front of everyone! How is that not wrong?" Briston shouted, incredulous. "That's because you acted so stupid." "Wait, hold on. How is setting a date for our wedding a crime?" Briston interrupted, utterly confused. "It is when you don't talk to me about it first," Yvonne retorted. "That's because it was supposed to be a surprise," Briston explained, exasperated. "Well, newsflash, I didn't like it," Yvonne replied coldly. Briston stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Why do I feel like you were never planning to marry me?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with pain. She laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the stillness of the night. She stopped abruptly, then sighed. "Briston, I don't have time for this. Move your car." She turned to leave, but Briston grabbed her arm, desperation in his voice. "Okay, fine, I'm sorry, I should have told you first." Yvonne shook her head, her expression softening slightly. "Briston, go home. We'll talk about this another day. Right now I'm tired and I need to get home," she said, pulling her arm free. As she walked back to her car, Briston stood there watching her leave, feeling helpless. He heard the driver honking for him to move his car. "Turn around," Yvonne ordered the driver, who immediately reversed and took another route, leaving Briston standing alone in the darkness. He stood there for a moment, confused and frustrated, wondering where everything had gone wrong. He felt the first drops of rain begin to fall, snapping him out of his thoughts. With a sigh, he hurried back into his car and drove off into the night, the rain steadily growing heavier. Yvonne stormed into her room and slammed the door with a loud bang. "Ah!" she screamed, throwing her bag onto the bed with force. Anger radiated from her as she marched to her dressing table, gripping its edges tightly. Staring at her reflection in the mirror, her breath quickened. "Ah!" she screamed again, her voice filled with frustration and helplessness. A knock on the door abruptly interrupted her thoughts. She turned to the door, her face twisted in anger. "What? Who is it?" she yelled, rushing to fling it open. Standing in the doorway was Selina, her body stiff and nervous. No matter how many of Yvonne's tantrums she had witnessed, Selina would never grow used to them. "What the hell do you want?" Yvonne snapped, her voice dripping with venom. Selina took a deep breath before speaking. "Madame asked me to tell you to meet her in the lounge downstairs," she said softly, her eyes avoiding Yvonne's piercing glare. She knew better than to make direct eye contact in moments like this. Yvonne's temper flared even more at the mention of her mother's request. "Now listen to me, you old hag. Go back and tell my mother I don't want to be disturbed. Tell her I want to be left alone," Yvonne spat, her voice sharp and unyielding. Selina trembled under the weight of her words, but stood her ground. She had been given clear instructions by Gwen, Yvonne's mother, not to return without her daughter. "Madame said I'm not to come back without you," Selina replied, her voice shaking slightly as she delivered the message. Yvonne's eyes darkened with fury. The humiliation she had suffered earlier at the Antonov mansion surged back into her mind, adding fuel to her anger. "Are you stupid? Get the hell out of my sight before I lose my cool, you poverty-stricken thing," she shouted, slamming the door in Selina's face. Selina flinched as the door banged shut. For a moment she was frozen in place, heart racing. Her first instinct was to flee, but she remembered Gwen's firm orders. She hesitated, raising her hand to knock again, but stopped midway. Facing Gwen would be difficult, but Yvonne's wrath was far worse. With a sigh, she lowered her hand and began walking down the hallway. As she descended the stairs, the soft glow of the lounge lights greeted her. The room exuded sophistication, its polished surfaces reflecting the light, and the air was filled with the sweet fragrance of flowers. Selina's steps slowed as she neared the entrance to the lounge, her heart beating in her chest. Gwen sat in her usual place, engrossed in a book. Her face was calm but serious, her demeanor unwavering. Selina watched her from a distance, trying to muster the courage to deliver the bad news. She gulped twice, imagining Gwen's reaction. It was better to stay at a distance than risk the wrath that might follow her failure to come back with Yvonne. "Ma'am, young ma'am has asked to be left alone," Selina muttered softly, standing near the entrance to the lounge, her voice barely audible. Gwen raised her head from the book she was reading, her expression sharp. "What did you say?" Selina swallowed nervously, her throat dry. Young ma'am said she doesn't want to be disturbed," she repeated, her words stumbling over each other. Gwen closed her book with a soft thud, her sigh long and heavy. "What has happened this time?" she muttered under her breath. Rising from her seat, she began to make her way towards Selina, who stood a few meters from the door, her back pressed against the wall. As Gwen approached, Selina's heart raced, but she forced herself to keep a confident look despite the fear gripping her. When Gwen finally stood in front of her, towering in authority, she gave Selina a sharp look. "What did I say about not returning without her?" Gwen's voice held a quiet command, one that brooked no disobedience. Selina's pulse quickened as she gulped nervously. "Ma'am," she said, not to disturb her. And before I could say anything, she slammed the door in my face, she replied quickly, shutting her eyes tight, bracing herself for the slap she expected to come. Her heart pounded in her chest and she prayed the slap would be swift so her anxiety could ease. But instead of the sharp sting of Gwen's hand, Selina heard something unexpected, a soft chuckle. Gwen looked at her from head to toe, seemingly amused by her nervousness. She stepped closer and commanded, "Open your eyes." Selina hesitated for a moment, then opened her eyes slowly, meeting Gwen's piercing gaze. Her heart still hammered, but what came next shocked her. "Retire for the night," Gwen said quietly, her voice calm and collected, before turning and walking out of the room. Selina blinked, unable to believe what had just happened. The rush of tension left her body, and she felt like a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. "What just happened?" she whispered to herself. She had fully expected the usual slap or harsh words, but she had received nothing. A smile crept across her face, and she wiped away the beads of sweat on her forehead before quietly making her way out of the lounge. Meanwhile, as Gwen approached Yvonne's room, her mind raced. She couldn't help but wonder what had happened to provoke such intense anger in her daughter. It wasn't like Yvonne to refuse to even see her. Something serious must have happened at the Antonovs' dinner, and that's why Gwen had spared Selina from punishment. She needed to handle this delicately. Inside her room, Yvonne lay on her bed with the sheets pulled over her head, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Her chest felt heavy with emotion. When she heard a knock at the door, she ignored it, hoping the person would leave, but the knocking persisted, growing louder each time. Frustration boiling over, she angrily threw the covers off and stomped toward the door, prepared to unleash her fury on whoever dared to disturb her. "What? What do you want?" she shouted as she yanked the door open, expecting to see Selina. But it wasn't Selina. Standing in front of her was her mother. Yvonne's anger deflated instantly. "Why are you raising your voice like that? And why do you look like this?" Gwen asked, her eyes narrowing as she noticed the thick black streaks of smeared mascara running down Yvonne's cheeks. Yvonne sighed, feeling defeated, and stepped aside to let her mother in. Gwen walked into the room, her expression serious. "Didn't Selina come to get you?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. "Mum, I just want to be left alone, can't I?" Yvonne said wearily as she sat back down on the bed, her shoulders slumped. Gwen's brow furrowed as she stood still, watching her daughter closely. Something was definitely wrong. "Tell me what happened," Gwen said softly, folding her arms across her chest, her tone urging Yvonne to open up. Yvonne felt the sting of tears gathering in her eyes again, and she fought hard to hold them back. She didn't want to cry, didn't want to show weakness. But as soon as she opened her mouth to speak, the tears betrayed her, streaming down her face uncontrollably. "Mom, they humiliated me," she choked out, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't think they want me there." Gwen's face softened as she sat down beside Yvonne. "Who humiliated you, Yvonne? What happened?" she asked gently, her voice filled with concern. Yvonne's tears flowed more freely now. At the Antonovs' dinner, they looked at me like I didn't belong. They made these subtle comments, Mum, and I just felt so out of place. I tried to hold it together, but I couldn't. I felt so humiliated. Gwen sighed deeply, pulling Yvonne into a comforting embrace. Oh, Yvonne, I'm so sorry you had to go through that, she said softly, stroking her daughter's hair. But you belong wherever you want to be. Don't let them make you feel less than you are. Yvonne buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her sobs slowly quieting as Gwen held her tightly. The world outside felt far away, and for now, all Yvonne wanted was the comfort of her mother's arms. Mom, none of them like me. You should have seen how they talked to me. They treated me like I was some pauper. Yvonne's voice wavered with frustration as tears welled up in her eyes. What? Gwen responded, her brow furrowing. She wasn't sure where this was headed, but she could sense her daughter's deep pain. Yes, Mum. Even after everything I did to look good, that evil thing called Nara wore the same color dress as me. She stole the entire spotlight again, and that's not all. When I arrived, I wasn't even greeted properly. They looked at me like I was a complete stranger. Mom, you should have seen Jacob's reaction when Nara walked in. You'd think royalty had just entered the room. Gwen sighed, trying to remain patient. Is that all? No, Mum, Yvonne exclaimed, her frustration mounting. That's not all. You should have seen how they treated me at the dinner table. It was as if I didn't even exist, just there to fill space and eat free food. All through dinner it was Nara this, Nara that, Gordon this, Gordon that. I wish I hadn't even wasted my time or energy going there, and the worst part, Mum, was Briston. He just sat there like a fool while his family humiliated me. He didn't say or do anything to defend me. Gwen's eyes narrowed as Yvonne continued to unload her frustrations. And Mum, Nara had the nerve to make me get up and hug her. You should have seen the look on her face, so smug, so triumphant. She knew exactly what she was doing. Gwen's brow furrowed. But at least did you get a chance to talk to Gordon? She asked, her eyes lighting up with a spark of hope. Yvonne's face darkened and her voice turned icy. It was as if everything she had said to her mother had fallen on deaf ears. Mum, did you even listen to a word I just said? I did, and it's the same story I hear every time you come back from the Antonovs' dinner. So tell me, did you speak to Gordon today? Gwen replied, her tone calm but resolute. How the hell was I supposed to speak to him, Mum, after what Briston did? Yvonne's anger flared as she stood, staring at her mother with disbelief. Gwen's curiosity piqued. Briston? What did Briston do? Yvonne crossed her arms, pacing back and forth in frustration. Remember the surprise he said he had planned for me? Yes, Gwen nodded, still unsure where this was going. Yvonne stopped pacing, her face twisted in anger. Mom, you won't believe what the surprise was. Gwen leaned forward slightly, her curiosity rising. What was it? The idiot announced, right in front of his family, that he'd set a date for our wedding, the last day of next month. What? Gwen gasped, her voice rising in shock. She hadn't expected this. I don't even know what gave him the nerve to think I'd marry him. Yvonne's voice broke with frustration. And what was your response when he announced it? Gwen asked, leaning in with concern. I slapped him, of course, she said with full confidence. You slapped him? Why would you do something like that? What's wrong with that? Yvonne snapped at him. Gwen looked at her and shook her head in pity. She had raised a weakling. It was not her fault. She watched as Yvonne struggled with the tears that fell from her eyes. She shook her head in pity. Why are you always the one to lose every time? Huh? Yvonne asked, confused. You heard me right and clear. Why are you always the loser every time? She shouted, causing Yvonne to shudder immediately in fear. Mom, what do you mean by that? Yvonne cried out. Every time you come home whimpering like a lost puppy, can't you take charge? Must I do everything for you? I can't believe you would let Nara walk over you. Who the hell is Nara? That non-entity. She paused to gasp for air. Now listen to me, young lady. You had better pick yourself up and put our plans into action. Bow, let me bust your bubbles. We are going bankrupt. Your father's company is going into shambles, and you are our only hope. The faster you get into Gordon's life, the easier for us. or you can kiss goodbye to your sweet fairy tale lifestyle," she shouted, and with that she walked out of the room. Yvonne was shell-shocked. She had never spoken to her like that before. She couldn't believe what had just happened. She pinched herself to check if she was dreaming. "Ouch!" She cried out. She was not dreaming. She felt the pain from her pinch in her skin. "Ah!" she cried out, standing up. She was boiling with rage and anger. She angrily dragged the bedsheets from the bed. She shoved the pillows aside. Then in that same frenzy, she angrily went to the dressing table, and with an angry push, everything on the table came crumbling down. She looked at herself in the mirror, panting, "Bankrupt. How the hell are we going bankrupt?" she cried out. She could bear the thought of losing to Nara, but going bankrupt was one she could not bear. How was she going to keep up with her lifestyle? She was a celebrity model. What would people say when they found out that Yvonne Vespertine was going broke? She couldn't bear the thought of that. She could not, even in her wildest dreams, believe that a day like that could come. "Nara, this is all your fault. Ever since you married Gordon, everything has just been ruined," she said to herself, as her tears flowed down her cheeks. She could taste the saltiness of her tears as they touched her lips. Then she looked at herself in the mirror. Dark lines had made their way from her eyes to her lips. It was from her mascara. She touched the line and pressed it across her skin as it left a huge black smear on her cheeks. Then her eyes met the diamond necklace Briston hand gifted her. She touched it and smiled. At that moment she wiped her eyes. Her mother was right. This was not a time to cry. If she wanted to remain at the top, she had to fight for it. She could pull down any obstacle in her way. She began to laugh hysterically as she wiped her eyes. She had found a newfound courage. She was not going to let her father go bankrupt. "Over my dead body," she said with an evil smirk as she wiped her face clean. The ride back home was unusually quiet. Gordon and Nara were silent as they were both deep in thought about what had just happened back at the dinner. Nara was deep engrossed in what she had witnessed in the bathroom with Penelope and Miriam. She was still trying to comprehend what had just happened. She remembered the look on Penelope's face. It was something she had not seen before, an expression more fierce than the one on Gwen and Yvonne's faces. It had the aura of deep-rooted hatred. She couldn't help but wonder what Miriam must have done to deserve such treatment. Gordon turned occasionally to steal side glances at her. He wondered what must have been going through her mind. He felt that it must have something to do with Yvonne and Briston. The car pulled to a stop in front of the mansion. Nara, we are home." Gordon called out to her when he noticed how absent-minded she was. "Oh, we are home already," she said, turning her head. She was so engrossed in her thoughts, she had not taken any notice of it when they got back home. With a sigh, she got down from the car and shut it with a bang. She looked up and saw the big mansion standing in front of her. At that moment, she did not feel like going inside. The weather was kind of hot. She looked at the night sky. It was the perfect time for a night swim. "Aren't you going in?" Gordon asked when he turned and realized that she was not making any move to go inside. Not really. I thought I should go for a swim." "A swim?" Gordon asked, surprised. "Yes, of course. Besides, the weather is a little bit hot," she said, smiling. Gordon looked at his watch. It was already some minutes past the hour of 9. "Don't you think it's a little too late for that?" Nara smiled and began walking to the back of the mansion where the pool was. "Aren't you coming?" she shouted as she made her way straight to the pool. Gordon shook his head in surprise. He wondered who would possibly go for a swim at night. Perhaps only Nara. He shook his head and reluctantly followed her. He could not leave her alone by the pool so late at night. Even if he was not going to swim, he could at least stay and watch her till she was done. "Wait for me," he shouted as he walked up to meet her. Arriving at the pool, Nara was already seated with her legs dangling and kicking the water. Gordon turned and saw her shoes sprawled on the ground. He shook his head and walked closer to her, his hands tucked inside his pockets. "Isn't the water cold?" he asked her, watching her smile as the water splashed across her leg. "Will you keep on standing or will you come and join me?" she said as she raised her head and looked at him and smiled. Gordon couldn't help but marvel as her eyes glittered like those of the stars. He slowly removed his shoes and sat beside her. He wondered why he was doing what he was doing. there was something about her that prompted him to do as she asked. He felt the coldness of the water in his feet. It was not disturbing. Instead, it gave off a cold feeling which sort of relaxed and cooled his nerves. He looked at Nara. She playfully kicked her legs against the water, smiling childishly. He couldn't help but smile. She looked so beautiful that night, and the diamond necklace on her neck also added a touch to her beauty. "I'm sorry for what happened today at the dinner your father organized," she apologized, breaking the silence. "Sorry? How is that any of your fault?" "Well, it had something to do with my sister, so let's just say I am apologizing on her behalf." Gordon was surprised. This was the same sister that had tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. "Well, it's not your fault. If anyone has to apologize, it's my brother." Nara turned and looked at him. She immediately burst into laughter. "Your brother?" she asked amidst laughter. "Yes," Gordon said. His face was etched with confusion. He wondered what was making her laugh. He wondered if he had said anything funny. "Well, this is the first time I have heard you address him as your brother. Other times you call him by his name." Gordon smiled. "Let's just say I am in a good mood today." Nara nudged Gordon lightly and they both burst into laughter. The laughter was interrupted when she suddenly asked, "Do you think Yvonne did the right thing? I mean, slapping Briston?" Gordon didn't respond immediately. He was puzzled by why Nara was still dwelling on what had happened between Yvonne and Briston. To him, it wasn't important. He considered both Yvonne and Briston as irrelevant people in their lives, not worth any of his concern. But Nara's serious expression prompted him to reply. "Well, I think she overreacted." "Yes," Nara agreed. "That's what I thought too. But Briston shouldn't have made that announcement without telling her first. He said it was supposed to be a surprise, remember?" Gordon reminded her, shrugging. Nara sighed, her frustration still lingering. "Well, that doesn't count as a surprise to me. He kept her in the dark. I would have been annoyed too." Gordon remained silent, only nodding in agreement, hoping the topic would fade away. But suddenly, Nara turned to him again with a question that caught him off guard. "Tell me, Gordon, have you found out how we got married?" "Huh?" He was startled, his mind taking a moment to catch up with her abrupt change in subject. "You said you were going to look into it," she pressed. "How did we end up getting married? Have you found anything?" Gordon's mind raced. He had completely forgotten about it, immediately after Jeffrey had revealed everything to him. He had meant to tell her, but it had slipped his mind. Now, as he opened his mouth to explain, he stopped himself. He remembered how she had just mentioned being kept in the dark earlier, and his heart skipped a beat. What if she got angry when she found out he had known for some time and hadn't told her? She might misunderstand him, thinking he was intentionally keeping secrets. Not really," he lied, his voice hesitant. "Jeffrey is still looking into it." "Oh," Nara replied, her voice calm but tinged with disappointment. She had expected more, and he knew it. Her eyes reflected the letdown he had just handed her. "Do you really want to know?" Gordon asked, trying to read her mood. "Of course, don't you?" Nara responded, her voice more excited now. "I, for one, would really like to know how I ended up getting married to you." She playfully tapped his back, trying to lighten the mood. "Ouch," Gordon exclaimed, feigning pain. "Don't lie, that didn't hurt at all," Nara teased, hitting him again playfully. They both burst into laughter, but it didn't last long. Nara's laughter faded quickly, and the same gloomy look returned to her face. Gordon noticed the change in her expression and immediately became concerned. "What is it?" he asked softly. "You've had that look on your face ever since we left my father's house. Is something wrong?" Nara hesitated. She knew she should tell him what she had witnessed, but she was unsure if it was the right thing to do. She knew Gordon had a soft spot for Miriam, and he had a right to know what had transpired. But was now the right time to bring it up? But she decided to tell him anyway. She couldn't keep it to herself anymore. It was eating deep into her. "I saw something," Nara started, her voice uncertain. "What did you see?" Gordon asked, growing impatient as his curiosity heightened. Nara shifted, trying to adjust herself properly, trying to find the right words. "You know when I excused myself to go to the bathroom during dinner? I saw something. Something that shocked me." "Come on, Nara, what did you see?" Gordon asked, his voice now urgent. Nara took a deep breath, steeling herself to deliver the news. I saw Penelope. She was dragging Aunt Miriam by the hair. At first I thought it was some kind of joke, but Aunt Miriam was in real pain. She was on the ground. And Penelope. She was pulling her hair so hard as if she wanted to rip it out by the roots. "What?" Gordon shouted, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Penelope did that?" Nara could see the color drain from Gordon's face, replaced by a flushed redness as his anger surged. His eyes darkened with hatred, and she realized just how much her words had affected him. She could see the rage building inside him, and it terrified her. Why? Why would she do that? Gordon's voice trembled with emotion, a mix of shock and anger. She regretted telling him almost immediately, her heart sinking as she watched his reaction. She had hoped to approach the situation delicately, but now she feared she had only fueled the fire. "I thought you had the right to know," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Gordon clenched his fists. "I can't believe this. I can't believe she would do that," he muttered to himself. The anger in his voice was clear, and she could only watch, unsure of what to say next. "What are you going to do about it? Will you tell your father?" Nara asked, her tone heavy with concern as she studied Gordon's face, searching for a sign of his next move. Gordon scoffed, his lips curving into a bitter smile. "Dad won't believe anything I say. He never does. But seriously, Nara, are you absolutely sure about what you saw? I mean, I'm baffled. What could possibly cause Penelope to try and hurt Aunt Miriam? They're not even close. In fact, they were never close enough to even argue. Aunt Miriam has been sick Amber since the death of her only child. Simon was my best friend at that time. That was around the same time my dad married Penelope, but as much as I remember, they weren't even acquaintances. His son died? Yes, Simon, he drowned. Well, that's what I heard. But his death took a huge toll on her. Nara, are you sure of what you saw? I mean, come to think of it, Penelope has no business with Miriam. Gordon, do I look like someone who would make up stories? Nara cut in, her voice growing tense. Didn't you notice she came back from the bathroom alone and I returned with Aunt Miriam? He paused, his mind replaying the events. Slowly the pieces began to fall into place and he nodded, his eyes widening slightly. No wonder. That explains the look on her face when she came back. It was fierce. And when Uncle Peter asked her about Aunt Miriam, she ignored him completely. Now it all makes sense. Nara shook her head, disappointment clouding her features. What baffles me the most is her reaction when I walked in on her. She wasn't even surprised or scared that I caught her. No, she was angry. Furious that I interrupted her, and her voice, Gordon, it was so cold when she spoke to me. Gordon's mouth twitched into a dry smile. That's Penelope for you. Huh? Nara looked at him, perplexed by his lack of shock. How do you mean? She furrowed her brows, unsure if Gordon understood the gravity of the situation. He sighed, crossing his arms as if bracing himself. I'm not surprised, Nara. That's just how she is. Her curiosity only deepened. What do you mean that's how she is? Do you know something I don't? Gordon met her gaze, then chuckled softly. Did you know Penelope was once a nurse? Nara's eyes widened. A nurse? She couldn't believe it. Penelope, a nurse? It didn't match her sharp, often cruel demeanor. Gordon nodded. Yes, she quit immediately. She married my father. But she doesn't look the part. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I mean, she looks so uptight, and she has this frown on her face. Dot, how could she possibly be a nurse? Nara asked, surprised. It was a long time ago. She was the nurse who took care of my mother before she passed away. Nara blinked in shock. Wait, she was your mother's nurse? Then how on earth did she end up with your father? Well, Gordon sighed, as if weary from the weight of old secrets. After my mother died, Penelope and my father had an affair. And not long after, Briston was born. So my father felt he had to marry her. That's how she became part of the family. What? Nara exclaimed, reeling from the revelation. She had always known the Antonov family had its share of secrets, but this was something else entirely. She tried to imagine Penelope in that role, taking care of Gordon's mother, and it felt wrong, almost surreal. Gordon smiled sadly. Yeah. You know, once, a long time ago, I confronted her. I asked her how she could live in my late mother's home knowing what she'd done. Do you know what she said to me? Nara shook her head, bracing herself for the answer. She told me bold as brass that if I didn't like her being around, then I should leave. His voice tightened with bitterness as the memory came rushing back. She didn't care, Nara. She never did. Nara was speechless. She didn't need to imagine the coldness in Penelope's expression when she said those words. She had seen the same look when she'd interrupted her in the bathroom earlier. Gordon continued, his voice low and distant. Now you understand why I don't speak to either of them, Penelope or Briston. And as for my father... He trailed off as though his thoughts were too painful to voice. Nara watched him, her chest aching with pity for him. She had no idea he had endured so much, the things he had gone through in that household, the people he had to live with. Slowly, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. I didn't know you went through all that, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Gordon shrugged, offering her a small, half-hearted smile. It's all in the past. I didn't turn out so bad, did I? Nara nudged him lightly, her own smile returning. No, you didn't. But her smile quickly faded as her thoughts turned back to Penelope. So what are you going to do about her now? Gordon's face hardened, his resolve clear. Don't worry about Penelope. I'll handle it. You don't need to get involved. His voice softened as he glanced at her, his expression one of reassurance. Nara nodded, though the unease lingered in her heart. She could see the determination in Gordon's eyes, and while she trusted him to take care of the situation, she couldn't shake the feeling that Penelope wasn't done with whatever sinister game she was playing. As they sat there in silence, Nara glanced at Gordon once more. His face was resolute, but she could sense the turmoil beneath his calm face. For now, all she could do was hope that he traded with caution. She could remember the words Penelope had told her in the bathroom. Truly, she was not one to joke with, as if grappling with unspoken thoughts. She shook her head slightly, wondering what could have driven Penelope to have treated Miriam in such a manner. A heavy sigh escaped her lips, her gaze drifting to the water. It shimmered under the moonlight, calm and inviting. Without warning, a sudden urge washed over her, compelling her to dive in. Without hesitation, Nara stood up. In one swift motion, she unzipped her dress and let it fall to the ground, revealing her matching underwear. What are you doing? Gordon asked, wide-eyed, caught off guard. Getting into the pool, of course, she replied with a grin. She loosened her hair that was packed into a bun, and it fell onto her shoulders. She also removed the necklace from her neck and kept it on the floor. Then she smiled and stared into the water, breathing in and out as she took in the cool night breeze, with her eyes closed tight. Before he could process what was happening, Nara leaped into the pool with effortless grace. Water splashed everywhere, some of it hitting Gordon as he sat on the edge. He watched, mesmerized, as Nara moved through the water with smooth, expert strokes. Her hair, now soaked and curly, clung to her face, and every time she submerged her head beneath the surface and re-emerged, a broad smile broke across her face. He couldn't help but smile too, watching her enjoy herself so freely. Are you going to keep sitting there smiling, or are you going to join me? Nara called out, splashing a bit more water his way. Gordon blinked, snapping back to reality. He hadn't even realized he'd been grinning. Oh no, I'm not getting wet, he stammered, suddenly self-conscious. Nara looked at him for a moment, then began swimming toward him with determined strokes. As she approached, she squeezed her eyes shut and let out a cry. Ah, my eyes, she exclaimed. Gordon's brows furrowed, uncertain if she was serious or pulling a prank. He hesitated for a second. My eyes, something got in them, she cried out again, rubbing them aggressively. Alarmed now, he leaned closer, concern etched on his face. What happened? What's in your eyes? He asked, his voice rising with confusion. Come closer and take a look, Nara said, still rubbing her eyes. Gordon bent over, his face inches from hers as he examined her, trying to see what was wrong. How does it hurt? Can you see? He asked, reaching out to gently touch her face. The moment his hand made contact with her skin, Nara's eyes flew open, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. Got you! She shouted gleefully. Before he could react, she grabbed his hand with surprising strength and yanked him into the pool. Nara! He yelled as he fell into the water with a splash. Laughter bubbled out of Nara, echoing around the pool. "Don't you like how refreshing it is?" she teased between fits of giggles. Gordon surfaced, wiping water from his face. Despite his initial shock, he found himself laughing too. "You think you're funny, don't you?" he said with a grin. "Oh, I know I am," she shot back playfully. "Wait till I catch you," Gordon said, his eyes narrowing with mock determination as he swam toward her. Nara squealed and immediately kicked off from the wall, swimming away. Their laughter filled the air as they chased each other around the pool, the moonlight casting their reflections on the rippling water. Every corner of the pool echoed with their joyful shouts and splashes. Eventually he managed to catch up with her, grabbing her by the waist. "Let me go!" Nara cried, laughing uncontrollably as she tried to wriggle free. "Not until you apologize," Gordon teased, tightening his grip slightly. "In your dreams," Nara shot back, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "In your dreams," she teased again, kicking Gordon's leg playfully. Startled by the unexpected move, he lost his grip on her waist, momentarily distracted. As she made to swim away, he quickly caught her hand, pulling her back to him with a firm but gentle motion. In an instant she was pressed against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Nara's breath caught in her throat. She looked up, her eyes locking with his. The intensity in his gaze sent a shiver down her spine, and she could feel her resolve weakening. "You are very beautiful," Gordon murmured, his voice soft and full of sincerity. Nara didn't respond, but the way she stared back at him said everything. As a gentle breeze swept across the pool, cooling the air, she became even more aware of how close they were. She could feel the warmth of his body despite the water's chill, the softness of his hands tracing the strands of her wet hair that clung to her skin. The moonlight bathed them, shimmering on the water's surface, and its reflection danced in her eyes. Gordon could hardly hold himself together. Ever since she had entered the pool, every movement, every smile had drawn him in deeper. Now, holding her so close, he could barely contain the overwhelming urge to kiss her. He had been holding back, unsure if it was the right time, but now his desire overpowered any hesitation. His gaze drifted down to her lips, watching as she bit them slightly. Her subtle movements, her presence, everything about her captivated him in a way he had never experienced before. With Nara, he felt more than attraction. He felt peace, a deep connection. "I'm going to kiss you now," he whispered against her ear, his voice low and sincere. "What?" Nara whispered, surprised. But before she could fully process his words, Gordon's lips were on hers, soft and gentle. She didn't push him away. Instead, she returned the kiss, her arms wrapping around his waist as if they were two pieces of the same whole. They held each other tightly, neither wanting to let go as they kissed under the moonlit sky. Briston drove crazily on the road after his encounter with Yvonne. He didn't know where he was driving to, he just wanted to drive far away. "Who the hell does she think she is to raise her hands on me?" he said as he drove. "Ah," he exclaimed, hitting his hands on the steering wheels. His mind was in a frenzy. All he could think of was what Yvonne had told him to his face. He wondered what he had done wrong. Early that morning, he had planned everything accordingly. He even planned a romantic date in a hotel after dinner. He had thought announcing the date of their marriage would make her happy, but he got the opposite of what he had thought. He tried to figure out what and how he had gone wrong. She had embarrassed him in front of everyone. He was already looked down on by his father, and now her attitude today had been the icing on the cake. Now Jacob would never take him seriously. How could he take over the company when he couldn't even control the woman he wanted to get married to? He could remember the look on his mother's face. Sure enough, it was that of disappointment. He knew she had every right to be disappointed in him. "Ah!" he screamed again, hitting the steering wheel. He remembered the demeaning look Gordon had given him. It was a look one would give to a fool. That was more than he could bear. At that moment, he felt a sudden urgency to go for a drink. He sighed deeply and swerved the car around. The only thing on his mind right now was to get himself drunk with alcohol and forget his problems. He pulled the car to a stop in front of a bar, the biggest bar in town. Its neon lights, which showed symbols of the bar's name, added a glow to the dark night. He opened the door of his car and got out with a sigh as he headed straight for the bar. Getting inside, the bar was unusually empty. He could make a head count of people that were there. He sighed with relief. That was exactly what he wanted. Peace and quietness with a sprinkle of alcohol. He walked straight to the bar and sat down on a high stool. A bartender dressed in a long black sleeve shirt which he complimented with a pink bow tie walked up to him immediately he sat down. "Hello, sir, what would you love to drink?" Briston raised his head up and looked at him. From his neatly styled curly hair down to his shirt, his pink bow tie caught his attention immediately, and it fueled his anger. "How can a man wear a pink bow tie?" Gordon asked him as he stared at him. "Excuse me?" the bartender asked, his face filled with confusion. He was unsure of what Briston meant by the question he asked. Briston looked at him irritatedly. Everything annoyed him, but he was in no mood to squabble words with anyone. "Just get me a glass of whiskey with ice," Briston replied and averted his eyes from him immediately. "Yes, sir," the bartender said and walked back to get his order ready. Briston looked around the very few people that were in the bar. They all seemed to be in a happy mood, smiling and laughing, and he wondered about what seemed to be funny. "Your order, sir," the bartender said, and he placed a glass of whiskey on the counter where Briston sat. Briston looked at the glass and nodded. It had quite the correct amount of ice he wanted. Then he turned and looked at the bartender, his pink bow tie still catching his attention. "Why do you wear that?" he asked, pointing to his neck. "Huh? What do you mean, sir?" the bartender asked, confusion etched all over his face. He looked around his attire to check if he had worn anything embarrassing or off, but he could find nothing. He wondered what Briston was referring to. "I mean that pink bow tie." "Oh, this. It's part of our uniform." "Huh? Who makes a pink bow tie a part of a uniform for men?" The bartender gave him a hard stare. He was angry about the remark Briston had made. "Excuse me, sir. I won't stand here and watch you insult me. If you want to remain here and make hurtful comments, you had better leave now, else I will call security on you." Briston was taken aback, amazed by the bartender's boldness. "I'm sorry. I'm not in the right frame of mind right now. Don't take my words to heart," he apologized, his voice softer. The bartender regarded him for a moment, then, with a sigh, turned and walked away. He scratched his head, frustrated. "Briston, what were you thinking?" he muttered to himself. He knew he couldn't fully blame himself. Everything was irritating him tonight, even the music playing in the background. It grated on his nerves. He picked up his glass of whiskey, took a sip, and winced. The whiskey was strong, burning its way down his throat. He placed the glass back on the counter with a frustrated thud, his irritation palpable. Turning around to scan the bar, he noticed something odd. The place, which had been nearly empty when he arrived, was now filled to the brim. The sudden influx of people caught him by surprise. He realized he shouldn't be shocked. After all, this was the most popular bar in town. As if on cue, a group of exotic dancers dressed in elaborate costumes stepped onto the floor. They moved in rhythm with the music, drawing cheers and applause from the patrons. But he wasn't interested. He turned away from the spectacle, focusing on his drink instead, taking another gulp. His face contorted as the alcohol hit him hard again. Just as he was about to sink deeper into his thoughts, he opened his eyes and froze. A familiar face stood before him. Andrew. "Hello," Andrew greeted, flashing a warm smile. Briston blinked in surprise. How did you know I was here?" he asked, glancing around as if expecting some hidden explanation. Andrew pulled a stool closer and sat down beside him. "I happened to be here and saw you drinking all by yourself," he explained casually. "Oh, that makes sense," Briston muttered, taking another sip of his whiskey, though it didn't seem to calm his nerves. Andrew glanced at his drink, then raised his hand to get the bartender's attention. "Hey, get me 2 glasses of whiskey with ice," he called out. The bartender acknowledged the order with a nod. Andrew suddenly chuckled. "Doesn't he look funny?" Briston raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "The guy with the pink bow tie," Andrew said, laughing. Briston's lips twitched into a smile. "I thought the same thing when I saw him earlier," he admitted. Andrew's laughter eased into a sigh and he leaned back. "You know, this situation feels strangely familiar." Briston frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Andrew's smile softened. "Have you forgotten already?" A few weeks ago I was the one sitting in this exact spot looking just as gloomy and lost. You came over to talk to me. Now here we are with the roles reversed. It's almost like fate is playing a hand." Briston paused, realizing Andrew was right. This was the very chair Andrew had sat in when they first met. The memory is vivid now. He had approached Andrew back then, trying to lift his spirits, and now Andrew was there doing the same for him. "You've got a sharp memory," Briston remarked, finishing off his whiskey with one final gulp. The warmth from the alcohol spread through him, dulling the edges of his frustration. He looked at Andrew, his thoughts swirling. Perhaps Andrew showing up wasn't just a coincidence. Perhaps this was his chance to finally ask what he'd been hesitant to bring up. About Nara. He sighed, glancing at his empty glass before turning back to Andrew. "Maybe fate really is at work," he muttered half to himself. There was an unspoken tension in the air, a weight that he had been carrying for too long. He needed answers, or at least some insight, and Andrew might just be the person to provide them. "You know, you look strikingly familiar, but I can't quite place where I've seen your face," Andrew said, studying Briston intently. "I'm sure I've seen you around somewhere?" Briston's heart sank. He hoped Andrew wouldn't recognize him. If he did, all his plans could unravel. I think you're mistaken. Sometimes people just look like other people," he said, trying to sound casual, praying Andrew would buy it. Andrew was silent for a moment, then shrugged. "Maybe you're right. So, a penny for your thoughts," he said with a smile. "Huh?" When a man's sitting alone, drinking, and not even appreciating the dancers, something's clearly bothering him. So, a penny for your thoughts. Just then, the bartender returned with 2 glasses of whiskey. "Your order, sir," he said to Andrew, placing them on the counter. Andrew nodded and handed one to Briston. "Here," Andrew said. "Thanks." Briston took the glass, drank, and placed it next to his empty one. "It's nothing serious. I had a fight with my fiancé," he said, hoping to keep the conversation casual. Andrew laughed. "I had a feeling it was about a woman. So, what was the fight about?" Briston hesitated, weighing his options. He knew he had to continue if he wanted Andrew to trust him. He needed information about Nara, and this might be the only way to get it. "Well, I set a date for our wedding without telling her. I wanted it to be a surprise, but she misunderstood and humiliated me in front of my family." "Wow, that's rough. Sounds like she overreacted." "Exactly. I'm still trying to understand why she slapped me over a wedding date. She could have just walked out, but no. She slapped me in front of everyone." "That's strange. Most women would be thrilled. I mean, who doesn't want to get married?" "That's what I thought too. But Yvonne, she's different," Briston said, taking another sip of his drink, regretting his slip-up the moment the name escaped his lips. "Yvonne?" Andrew repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. Briston's heart skipped a beat. He realized he'd said too much. "Yeah, that's my fiancé's name," he said, hoping Andrew wouldn't connect the dots and realize Yvonne was Nara's sister. Andrew chuckled. "Yvonne, huh? Funny. I know another Yvonne who might act the same way." Briston smiled weakly. "Really?" "Yeah, but come to think of it, no woman would slap her fiancé for setting a wedding date unless she's either not in love with him, or she doesn't want to marry him." Briston went quiet, mulling over Andrew's words. Could that really be the case? "That's not my Yvonne, she loves me. Maybe I just overwhelmed her with the surprise." Andrew burst out laughing. "Man, you really don't know women, do you?" Briston frowned. "What do you mean?" "Never mind," Andrew said, taking a sip from his glass, the amusement still lingering in his eyes. Briston watched him, debating whether it was the right time to bring up Nara. He decided to go for it. "So, why were you so down the first time we met?" "Oh, that. It's fine now, I figured it out," Andrew replied dismissively. "Come on, tell me, what really happened?" Andrew looked at him and smiled slyly. "Why are you so interested?" Briston shrugged. "No reason, I just wanted to know." Andrew downed the rest of his whiskey, then stood up. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of bills, placing them on the counter. "You're leaving?" Briston asked, surprised. "Yeah, I've got somewhere I need to be." "Oh, okay," Briston replied, disappointment creeping into his voice. Andrew noticed Briston's sullen expression and smiled. Don't worry. Next time we meet, I'll tell you the whole story," he said, patting him on the back before heading for the door. Briston watched him leave, letting out a deep sigh. He'd failed to get Andrew to talk about Nara. Maybe they were right. Maybe he really was a weakling. He shook his head in frustration, feeling the weight of the night settle heavier on his shoulders. The sound of birds chirping outside woke Yvonne from her sleep. She opened her eyes lazily, releasing a loud yawn as she sat up in bed. Her gaze swept across the room, taking in the disarray, evidence of her emotional outburst the night before. Rubbing her eyes, she stretched her body before getting up. Slowly, she made her way to the window. Drawing back the curtains with practiced ease, she opened the window. The morning sun bathed her face in a warm glow, and she squinted, temporarily overwhelmed by the brightness. Turning back to face the room, she smiled to herself. "Today is going to be a great day," she murmured. The heaviness she felt the previous night had lifted, thanks to her mother's harsh but encouraging words. She knew she had to up her game if she wanted their plans to be a success. It was the first day of rehearsals with Vanessa Crudge, a highly respected figure in the modeling industry. She realized she might have ruined her initial impression the first time she met Vanessa, but she wasn't going to let that deter her. She was determined to show Vanessa just how talented she was. Eager to make the most of the day, Yvonne headed to the bathroom to freshen up. She didn't want to be late for rehearsals. After a quick shower, she emerged wrapped in a bathrobe, humming a tune as she walked to her dressing table. She opted for a natural look, something subtle yet elegant. She carefully applied her makeup, aiming for an effortless beauty. A few minutes later, satisfied with her appearance, she smiled at her reflection. Next, she moved to her wardrobe, searching for the perfect outfit. Her fingers skimmed through the hangers before landing on a red shirt jumpsuit. The moment she touched it, she knew it was the right choice. "This will go perfectly with my makeup," she said, smiling to herself. Just as she was about to slip into the jumpsuit, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her smile faded when she saw who was calling. It was Briston. For a moment, she debated whether or not to answer. After a brief hesitation, she decided against it. Briston, she knew, loved her deeply, perhaps too much. She was certain he would do anything for her, but for now, she needed to keep him at arm's length. There was a plan forming in her mind, and it required keeping Briston in suspense. With a swift motion, she placed her phone on Do Not Disturb and returned to getting dressed. Once she had slipped into the jumpsuit, she stood in front of her full-length mirror examining her reflection. Everything was perfect. With a confident smile, she declared, "Now let the day begin." She shut the door behind her with a satisfying bang and headed downstairs, still humming the tune that had been on her lips all morning. In the dining room, Selena was setting the table for breakfast. "Selena!" Yvonne called out as she reached the bottom of the stairs. Selena nearly dropped the plates in her hands at the sound of Yvonne's voice. "Yes, ma'am?" she replied hurriedly, walking quickly to where Yvonne stood. "Good morning, ma'am," she added, her head bowed in respect. Selena couldn't forget the rage Yvonne had displayed the previous night. The memory of Yvonne's angry outburst lingered in her mind, and she was sure that another tantrum could erupt at any moment. Yvonne looked at Selena, her nose wrinkling in sudden irritation. "What is that smell?" she asked, covering her nose in disgust. Selena's eyes widened, and she glanced nervously around, unsure of what could be causing the offensive odor. "What smell, ma'am?" Selena asked, her confusion evident as she sniffed the air, trying to locate the odor Yvonne was referring to. Yvonne walked closer to her, sniffing. "Oh my God, the smell is coming from you!" she exclaimed. "Me?" Selena asked, baffled. She quickly sniffed her hands but detected nothing. Looking at Yvonne with confusion, she tried to understand what was happening. "Tell me, have you had your bath this morning?" Yvonne demanded. "Yes, ma'am," Selena replied, her face turning red with embarrassment. She had taken her bath early that morning and knew she didn't smell. "Oh my God, you stink, you dirty old hag!" Yvonne cried out, her voice sharp with disgust. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Selena apologized, though deep down she knew there was no smell. She didn't have the energy to argue, though. "Sorry for your old self," Yvonne snapped. "I don't have time to argue, my room is a mess. Make sure you tidy it up before I return," she ordered, flipping her hair dismissively as she turned to leave. She stopped abruptly when she saw her mother standing in front of her. "Good morning, Mum," Yvonne greeted her, flashing a smile. Gwen, taken aback, studied her daughter's expression. She was expecting Yvonne to be her usual moody self after the tantrum from the night before, but today, something was different. "You look so different this morning," Gwen said, still surprised. Yvonne smiled. "Well, Mum, let's just say I woke up on the right side of the bed today." Gwen raised an eyebrow, baffled by her daughter's sudden change in mood, but shrugged it off. "It seems like you're going out. Aren't you staying for breakfast?" "Oh no, Mum. The rehearsals start today and I don't want to be late." "But at least have some breakfast. Selena made your favorite," Gwen suggested. Yvonne glanced at Selena, still standing there, waiting to be dismissed. "Selena?" She wrinkled her nose. "The way she stinks this morning." "Oh no, Mum, I think I've lost my appetite," she said without mincing her words. She shot her eyes at Gwen, shaking her head, and Selena standing quietly in her embarrassment. "Selena smells?" Gwen asked, confused. "Of course, Mum," Yvonne replied dismissively. "You know what? I don't have time for this. I've got a big day ahead." She walked closer to her mother and kissed her cheek. "Bye, Mum. See you when I get back." "Okay, dear. Have fun today." Gwen smiled, watching as Yvonne left, still humming the same tune she'd been humming all morning. Gwen shook her head and smiled. Maybe, just maybe, Yvonne has had a great awakening after my scolding last night, she thought to herself. Turning back to Selena, who was still standing there, Gwen's expression hardened. "Come here," she barked. Selena hurried over. "Yes, ma'am," she responded, her voice low. Gwen gave her a once-over. "Yvonne said you smell. Is that true?" "Ma'am, Selena began, attempting to defend herself, but Gwen cut her off. "Go back and take another bath. Throw away the breakfast you made. Better yet, let you and the other maids eat it because I won't touch anything made by a smelly old hag," Gwen said briskly as she began walking away. "But ma'am, I took my bath this morning," Selena protested softly. "Do I need to repeat myself, Selena?" Gwen asked, not even glancing back. "No, ma'am," Selena replied, her voice resigned. "Then get to work," Gwen ordered as she ascended the stairs. Selena sighed deeply, feeling defeated. She had woken up early that morning with the other maids to prepare breakfast, and now she was being ordered to make another one. She couldn't understand where Yvonne and Gwen's complaints about her smell were coming from. To reassure herself, she sniffed her clothes and arms but couldn't perceive any unpleasant odor. A wave of exhaustion washed over her as she thought about the extra work ahead, but then, unexpectedly, a small smile crept onto her face. She hadn't eaten a decent meal in what felt like ages, and now, with Gwen's permission, she could share the breakfast she'd prepared with the other maids. Maybe this is a blessing in disguise, Selena thought to herself. Her mood lifted slightly and the idea of a hearty breakfast cheered her. With a lighter heart, she returned to the dining room, carefully collecting the plates and heading back to the kitchen. As she walked, she found herself humming the same tune Yvonne had been humming when she'd come downstairs, a small gesture of hope amidst the harshness of her morning. "What's happening? Why are you clearing the dishes when they have not even had anything to eat?" Mary, one of the maids in the kitchen, asked Selena, surprised. Selena kept quiet and carefully placed the plates on the counter. "Madam says we should have this for breakfast and prepare another one." "Why?" Mary asked, surprised. "Tell me, Mary, do I smell?" Selena asked her. Mary gave her a confused look. "Who says you are smelling?" Selena looked at her and pondered if she should tell whether the reason was because they thought she smelt, but she rebuffed the idea immediately. "Just start prepping the ingredients. I will be back shortly," Selena said, and with that she left Mary standing there speechless. Nara was just about to leave with her driver when Gordon hurriedly came out of the house, walking toward her. As she saw him approaching, a smile spread across her face. She couldn't help but think about the kiss they had shared last night, and it sent a flutter of butterflies through her stomach. "You didn't say good morning before leaving," Gordon said with a teasing smile. As he got closer, she caught the musky scent of his cologne. He smelled so good she couldn't deny it. "I thought you were still asleep. I didn't want to wake you," Nara replied, smiling shyly. Next time, don't leave without saying good morning, he said, playfully patting her on the head. Nara nodded, her smile widening. I have rehearsals today, I should get going. Rehearsals? Gordon asked, glancing around. Where's your manager? Isn't she supposed to be here with the bus? At the mention of her manager, Nara suddenly remembered Elena and their argument. She had completely forgotten. I asked her not to come today. I wanted to go on my own. Oh, I see, Gordon said, still looking around for the missing bus. I'll pick you up when you're done. Huh? Nara blinked, caught off guard. I'll pick you up from the agency after rehearsals, he repeated, his voice steady and firm. Nara chuckled nervously. Oh no, you don't have to do that. I'm not asking, Gordon replied immediately, his tone leaving no room for argument. She couldn't help but smile again. She liked the way he looked at her, his confidence, his protectiveness. Okay then, I better get going. I don't want to be late. She waved at him as she stepped into the car. Gordon smiled, watching her leave. He waved back, his eyes following the car until it disappeared down the street. Once she was out of sight, he sighed in relief, still smiling. Something about Nara was changing him, stirring emotions he had never felt before, and he loved it. He remembered how they kissed the night before. He remembered the look in her eyes. He sighed deeply as he closed his eyes to relish the moment, then suddenly he remembered. He had a meeting with his father that morning. He looked at his watch. Gosh, I'm late, he said, and rushed inside to get ready to leave. Nara, too, sat in the car with a smile, thinking about Gordon. In a way, she was scared of the fact he wanted to pick her up. She knew the girls at the agency. She didn't want to create a different narrative. She didn't want them to see her as someone that wanted to proudly flaunt her husband around, but Gordon was not the one to back down when he said something, and she didn't have the energy to argue with him. That was why she didn't say anything when he had offered to pick her up. She sighed and closed her eyes, her mind twirling in what the day had installed for her. The rehearsal hall was already packed with models, buzzing with chatter and energy. Nara stood at the door, peering inside, her palms sweaty. Despite having been there before, she felt as nervous as she had on her first day. Her stomach knotted, and she wished she could spot Stephanie. Her comforting presence had helped her navigate that intimidating first day. Are you going in or not? A woman's voice asked from behind her. Nara turned quickly, startled by the interruption, and her breath caught in her throat when she saw who it was. Standing before her was none other than Vanessa Crudge, the legendary supermodel. Nara froze, completely awestruck. The scent of Vanessa's perfume, reminiscent of roses, lingered in the air between them. Nara stammered, lost for words. Vanessa smiled gently. You must be Nara, she said, her voice smooth and welcoming. Nara blinked in disbelief. Vanessa Crudge knows my name? It seemed impossible. You know my name? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her surprise obvious. Vanessa chuckled softly. Of course. Tell me, how is Jacob? She asked casually as though she were speaking to an old friend. Nara's eyes widened even more. You know my father-in-law? She blurted out. Vanessa nodded. Yes, we go way back. Nara's disbelief deepened. Wow, she exclaimed, trying to process the information. Surprised? Vanessa asked, an amused smile playing on her lips. Yes, of course, I'm shocked, Nara admitted, still reeling from the realization. Vanessa's smile softened. You don't need to be, so tell me, why aren't you going inside? Nara sighed and glanced back at the door. I'm nervous, she confessed, her voice small. Nervous? But this isn't your first time here. Why the nerves? Vanessa asked, tilting her head slightly as she observed Nara. Nara bowed her head, feeling embarrassed. Vanessa was right. She shouldn't be this nervous. After all, this is not your first time here. But something about the expectations, the pressure, and the number of models inside made her heart race. Vanessa studied her for a moment, understanding exactly how Nara felt. She had been in Nara's shoes once, standing on the edge of greatness but feeling too nervous to take that final step. The memories of her early days in the industry came flooding back, and she could see a bit of her younger self in Nara. You know, Vanessa said, her voice thoughtful, you remind me of myself when I first started. Huh? Nara looked up, confused by the sudden statement. Vanessa just smiled and said, "Let's go inside." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked toward the door, pushing it open confidently. Nara hesitated for a brief moment, then realized it was now or never. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and followed Vanessa inside. The hall was even more crowded than she had imagined, filled with chatting models and bustling activity. Nara's eyes quickly scanned the room, searching for a familiar face. Luck was on her side. In the fourth row, she spotted Stephanie waving eagerly to get her attention. Relief washed over Nara like a wave. She smiled and waved back, quickly making her way to where Stephanie was seated. "Where have you been?" Stephanie whispered as Nara approached. "I saved you a seat," she said, tapping the chair beside her. "Thanks," Nara whispered gratefully as she sat down. Stephanie leaned in closer. "What took you so long? You know we're not supposed to enter once the tutor arrives. I'm surprised Vanessa let you in," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. Nara paused, her mind replaying the encounter with Vanessa. Stephanie's words struck her. If the rules were that strict, why had Vanessa let her enter the hall? She glanced at Vanessa, who was now speaking with some of the other models at the front of the room, as composed and elegant as ever. The question gnawed at Nara. Why had Vanessa made an exception for her? Nara's thoughts raced. Could it have been because of Jacob? But Vanessa hadn't mentioned anything specific about helping her out, only asking about her father-in-law. The thought both excited and unsettled her. Stephanie watched Nara's expression shift from confusion to deep contemplation. "Are you okay?" she asked, nudging her gently. Nara forced a smile, pushing the questions to the back of her mind for the moment. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." "Well, whatever it is, you're lucky. Vanessa Crudge doesn't bend the rules for just anyone," Stephanie said with a knowing look. "You must have made quite an impression." Nara nodded absently, her thoughts still spinning. Why me? She glanced at Vanessa again, who was now addressing the entire group with a poised authority that commanded attention. Nara's heart beat faster. Whatever the reason, she knew she couldn't waste this opportunity. Straightening in her seat, she made a silent promise to herself. She was going to prove she belonged here, no matter what. "Well, maybe it's because it's her first day?" Stephanie finally suggested. "Yeah, maybe," Nara muttered. She raised her head and scanned the room, looking for Yvonne. As expected, Yvonne was seated in the front, surrounded by other models who seemed engrossed in a conversation. Nara felt relieved that they hadn't noticed her when she entered. Her gaze shifted across the room, and she spotted Vanessa sitting off to the side, absorbed in her iPad and occasionally glancing at her wristwatch. Nara watched her in amazement. Every movement Vanessa made was filled with grace. Suddenly, Vanessa stood up and walked steadily toward the front of the room. She climbed onto a podium and faced the models. As soon as she stood there, the room fell silent. "Good morning, ladies," Vanessa greeted, her voice calm yet authoritative. The models listened intently. "I don't think I need any introduction, but for the sake of clarity, I am Vanessa Crudge," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "And I will be your tutor for the Olympians runway show, which will take place in a week's time." Vanessa paused for a moment, reading the expressions on the models' faces. Nara could feel the intensity of the moment. Vanessa had a presence that commanded attention. "Isn't she amazing standing there?" Stephanie whispered to Nara, noticing how fixated she was on Vanessa. "Yeah," Nara said softly, still in awe. Vanessa continued, "As you have already been briefed by Harry, not all of you will walk the runway on the day of the show. There will be a selection process, a selection of the best among the best. So, if you want to be among the chosen models, I suggest you give it your all during these rehearsals." She stopped again, letting her words sink in before adding, "Underneath your seats are shoes, 5-inch heels, heavy ones. Today you will all wear them and walk for me. I will start awarding points from this rehearsal onward." She raised her hands slightly and gestured for them to check under their seats. "Please retrieve your shoes." The room rustled as everyone bent down to grab their heels. Nara's eyes widened in disbelief when she held hers. They were far heavier than anything she had worn before. She had always been able to handle any length of heel, but this was a different challenge. Her palms grew sweaty as she realized this was her weak spot. She had tried many times to master walking in heavy heels like these, but each attempt had ended in failure. Now the pressure was on, and she felt herself starting to panic. "Now we may begin," Vanessa called out, her voice steady as she walked back to her seat. The models in the front row were the first to walk, their movements smooth and confident. They made it look easy, strutting down the makeshift runway as if the heavy shoes were nothing more than slippers. Nara watched in admiration, her anxiety growing with each passing model. When it was Yvonne's turn, she stood up confidently, her expression calm and self-assured. Walking in heavy heels had never been an issue for her. In fact, she could do it with her eyes closed. As she stepped forward, she raised her head high and glanced around the room before turning her gaze toward Vanessa. "Time to make my impression," Yvonne murmured to herself. She began walking, lifting her legs with grace and ease, her steps firm and measured. The room watched as Yvonne glided across the floor, each movement fluid and precise. Vanessa nodded subtly, clearly impressed with Yvonne's performance. Nara, meanwhile, could only watch, feeling more nervous by the second. How could she compete with someone who made it look so effortless? Nara's heart pounded in her chest. Her turn was fast approaching, and she still hadn't shaken the dread that had settled deep inside her. She swallowed hard, clutching the heels tightly in her hands. The surrounding voices seemed distant as her mind raced. She knew she couldn't afford to mess this up, not when so much was on the line. She glanced at Stephanie, who offered a small, encouraging smile. It helped, but the weight of the shoes in her hands still felt unbearable. Taking a deep breath, she prepared herself, knowing that in a few short moments she would have to walk, or risk losing her chance at everything she'd worked so hard for. As Yvonne finished her walk, turning with a smooth, practiced motion, the hall erupted into a round of applause. Vanessa gave a subtle nod of approval as Yvonne returned to her seat, radiating confidence. She gulped nervously, knowing she couldn't replicate what Yvonne had just done. Anxiety gnawed at her, and she feared disappointing Vanessa. She knew she had to do her best. One by one, the girls took their turns walking in the heavy high-heeled shoes. Some models strutted majestically without a single flaw, while others stumbled or fell before they could even take a few steps. Each fall was met with gasps, and the room tensed whenever someone struggled. Finally, it was Nara's turn. Stephanie had just completed her walk without a hitch, and as she returned to her seat, she gave Nara a reassuring smile. "You'll do fine," she whispered softly, offering encouragement. Nara nodded but couldn't shake the dread settling in her stomach. She clutched her shoes tightly as she walked to the podium. Unlike the other girls, Nara hadn't put on the heavy heels beforehand. She knew her weakness and didn't want to set herself up for failure before even standing. But now, all eyes were on her. "You're not wearing your shoes?" Vanessa's voice broke through the silence, her brow slightly raised as she noticed Nara carrying them in her hands. She gulped and quickly responded, "I'll put them on now." Her voice was shaky as she hurriedly removed the shoes she had been wearing and slipped into the heavy ones. She fumbled slightly with the straps but eventually got them on. "The floor is yours," Vanessa said, stretching her hand out toward the runway. Nara took a deep breath, nodded, and took her first step. The shoes felt like lead, each step more challenging than the last. She whispered to herself, "Nara, control yourself, you can't fall. They're watching." Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a second, then a third step. She tried to steady herself, her breathing shallow as her nerves took over. With each step, Nara grew more conscious of the weight of the shoes. On her fifth step, just as she thought she might make it, her right foot caught on her left. In a split second, she lost her balance and fell hard onto the floor. The entire hall gasped. Yvonne and her group, sitting in the front row, immediately burst into laughter. Their mocking voices echoed in Nara's ears, amplifying her humiliation. She lay on the ground, frozen, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Her eyes darted toward Yvonne, whose laughter sent a cold shiver down Nara's spine. "Get up!" Vanessa's voice cut through the laughter like a sharp knife. Nara scrambled to her feet, feeling her face flush with embarrassment. She couldn't even bring herself to look Vanessa in the eye. Her heart pounded as shame weighed heavy on her chest. "Again," Vanessa ordered, her voice stern but not unkind. Nara's breath hitched, but she knew she had no choice. She had to try again. Despite her fear, she took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and prepared to walk once more.